At 36,000 feet, silence isn't peace. It's a warning. No voice from the cockpit, no course corrections, just a sudden dip in altitude, and 186 people looking around for someone, anyone, to take control. And from seat 14F, she stood up. A 19-year-old with no wings on her chest, no license in her pocket, and a past she never meant to use again. But when the cockpit door opened, the truth wasn't who she was. It was what she remembered, and how that memory brought a falling jet back to Earth. Ertho, welcome to Vilvo Stories. Here, we explore near-impossible moments where instinct, courage, and timing collide. Fictional, yes, but built from the same steel that real courage is made of. If you're drawn to high-altitude decisions and characters who weren't supposed to be ready, but were, then you're in the right place. Buckle up. This story doesn't ask for permission. It takes the controls. The plane was already half-boarded when she stepped onto the jet bridge, her boarding pass slightly crumpled from being folded and refolded in her pocket. Row 14, window seat. She didn't look like much. Hoodie tied around her waist, hair pulled into a loose ponytail, a paperback novel tucked under one arm. Just another teenager flying with her family for a spring vacation. That's what the flight attendants saw. That's what most people saw. But Mia Weston wasn't just another 19-year-old. At least not entirely. She followed behind her younger brother, who was already glued to his phone, oblivious to the crowd, and her mother, who kept nervously checking overhead bins like someone afraid their entire life might not fit in a carry-on. Her father offered a tired smile to the flight crew as they passed into the cabin. Everything about them screamed average, normal, safe. And for the most part it was. Except for Mia. She slid into seat 14F, tucked against the window, and clicked her belt without thinking. Her fingers moved with a familiarity she didn't even register. Outside, the sun was dropping toward the horizon, casting golden streaks across the tarmac. The world looked calm, scheduled, like nothing unexpected ever happened at 36,000 feet. Excited? Her mom asked from the row across the aisle. Mia just nodded and gave a small smile. But her eyes were already scanning. Engine cowling, wing flaps, the way the ailerons responded during taxi. She wasn't watching like a passenger. She was observing like someone who had spent too many hours in a simulator, who had memorized checklists not meant for her age group. Her phone buzzed. Text from Colonel Jameson. Don't forget what you've trained for, even if no one else knows yet. Stay sharp. She read it twice, then deleted it. No one here knew, not even her parents. To them, she was just a girl who liked planes, who'd spent summers in aviation camps and had a weird fascination with flight manuals.
They didn't know about the private scholarship she had quietly won to attend cadet pilot training last fall, or the accelerated simulator hours she'd passed with near-flawless execution, or how one instructor had whispered she might be the best he'd seen under pressure, and how another had warned her that some people weren't ready for that kind of responsibility. It didn't matter. She was still too young for a license, still 1 year from her first official cockpit seat, still invisible. And yet, as the cabin doors sealed with a pneumatic hiss and the plane began its slow crawl toward the runway, something inside her tightened, not in fear, but in focus. A readiness that didn't have a place in vacation. Flight 719 to San Diego took off without fanfare. The captain's voice was warm, the weather reports clear, and turbulence expected to be minimal. The hum of takeoff rumbled through the cabin like a lullaby, and passengers began to drift into their routines. Headphones, naps, snacks. Mia opened her paperback, but her eyes didn't move across the page. She was still listening, still feeling. Altitude climb, gear retract, thrust balance, everything smooth. But she knew, sometimes smooth was just the silence before the storm. And though she hadn't come here to fly, something in her gut whispered that the sky might call her anyway. 35 minutes into the flight, the cabin had settled into the quiet lull of cruise altitude. Overhead lights dimmed, drink carts rattled softly through the aisles. Somewhere in the middle rows, a toddler giggled at a cartoon on a tablet. It felt like just another ordinary evening above the clouds. But Mia couldn't relax. She wasn't anxious, not exactly. It was subtler than that. A twitch in her senses, the kind of shift she trained to recognize in countless simulations. Something was off. She glanced up from her half-read book, tilting her head just slightly. No alarms, no visible warning signs, just the low hum of the engines and the even pitch of steady flight. And yet, there, a tremor. Not turbulence, not really. A kind of hesitation in the engine rhythm, like a skipped beat. She sat up straighter, her pulse rising only slightly. Her eyes flicked to the window, then toward the wing. Nothing obvious. Still, her fingers gripped the armrest before she realized what she was doing. She looked around. No one else seemed to notice. Her brother was asleep, head bobbing against the window. Her mother had an eye mask on, and her father was flipping through a travel magazine like this was the most uneventful flight of his life. But Mia's stomach had dropped half a second before the next vibration hit. This time it wasn't imagined. A jolt ran through the fuselage, enough to rattle drink cups and draw a few murmurs from passengers.
The fasten seatbelt sign chimed overhead. Flight attendants moved quickly, professionally, but not fast enough to hide the tension behind their practiced smiles. "Just some light turbulence," one of them announced, her voice strained through the intercom. "Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." But Mia knew turbulence. This wasn't that. She leaned toward the window, eyes locked on the wing. The ailerons were holding, but the tilt was uneven, small, subtle. Most passengers wouldn't detect it, but she did. A minute passed, then two. The hum returned, steady again, like nothing had happened. Mia exhaled slowly, trying to convince herself it had been a fluke, maybe a momentary systems imbalance. She'd read about those, trained for worse, but still she couldn't shake the way her body had reacted before her brain caught up. Then came the call from the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a minor mechanical issue and will be reducing speed slightly as a precaution. There's no cause for concern. Please remain seated and we'll keep you updated." His tone was even, maybe a touch too practiced. Mia replayed the message in her mind, not focusing on what he said, but how he said it. No cause for concern is what instructors were told to say when they didn't yet know what was wrong. She caught the subtle shift in the engine pitch again, this time a dragging undertone, like a mechanical component struggling to keep rhythm. Her chest tightened. Then, as if to confirm her instincts, the flight attendant from earlier moved quickly past her aisle, no drink cart this time, no tray in hand, just a rapid stride toward the cockpit, whispering something into a crew comm. Mia's eyes followed her until the curtain closed. Whatever was happening, it wasn't turbulence, it wasn't routine, and worst of all, it wasn't over. She closed her eyes for just a moment, letting all the lessons, all the training, all the what-ifs flood back into her body. Not your job, not your place, just a passenger. But something inside her didn't agree. She unclipped her belt, just for a second, and stood to stretch as if nothing were wrong. But she wasn't stretching. She was scanning, listening, feeling. Her eyes flicked up toward the cockpit door, still closed, still sealed, and behind it, silence. Then the lights flickered. Only for a breath, 1 second, maybe less, but when they returned, Mia was no longer thinking about vacation. She wasn't thinking about books or beaches or hotel breakfasts. She was thinking like a pilot, because the sky was whispering again. And this time, it wasn't going to be polite. It began with a sound she couldn't explain, a deep,
Uneven thud, like something beneath the aircraft had slipped out of place. Not mechanical, not natural, just wrong.
It wasn't the kind of noise you hear on a smooth cruise at 36,000 feet. It was the kind of sound that every training simulation tried to replicate and never quite got right. The passengers around her flinched. A few sat up straighter. One or two glanced nervously toward the overhead lights. Still no alarm, still no announcement, just a sudden stillness that didn't belong in the air. Mia's heart began to race, not from fear, but calculation. She could feel her mind doing what it was trained to do: assess, isolate, respond. She stared out the window again. The left wing dipped, slightly, but enough to skew the horizon line outside. Then it jerked back. Something was trying to correct itself, or failing to. Her mother was now wide awake, asking if she felt the jolt. Her brother removed one earbud and looked up, confusion spreading across his face. Before Mia could answer, the captain's voice broke through the intercom. This is your captain speaking. We are, currently experiencing a temporary issue with our secondary flight controls. Everything is fine. I repeat, the transmission cut off mid-sentence. No static, no click, just silence. It was the kind of silence that didn't need interpretation. This wasn't turbulence. This wasn't a systems test. This wasn't routine. It was failure, and it had just announced itself. The passengers froze. Some looked toward the nearest flight attendant, waiting for a cue, anything that might tell them how to feel. But the crew members were already in motion, hurried, whispered conversations behind curtains, hands over microphones, coded language exchanged under tense brows. Mia knew that language. She'd studied it. She'd been drilled on it. She'd heard the exact same tone of voice used during a blackout cascade simulation, one that ended in complete systems collapse within 7 minutes. Her fingers twitched. Do something. But she was in row 14, economy class. A girl in sneakers, no credentials, no badge, no uniform, no authority. Still, she couldn't just sit there. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, steadying herself as another jolt trembled through the fuselage. This one was sharper, less like turbulence, more like strain. The cabin lights dimmed, then flickered back with a delay. A woman across the aisle began to cry softly. The overhead screens flashed the airline logo, then went dark. No safety videos, no flight map, just nothing. Mia stepped into the aisle. A nearby flight attendant noticed and moved to intercept, her eyes wide, clearly tense but trained to conceal it. "Miss, I need you to stay seated." "I'm not a civilian," Mia said, her voice steady but low enough not to draw attention. "I'm cadet trained, United States Flight Academy. I've logged over 400 hours in commercial-grade simulation. I know what that last sound was."
"And I know you've lost contact with the cockpit." The flight attendant blinked. She hadn't expected that. Mia took a breath, then added, "If the crew needs assistance, if there's no response from the co-pilot, I can help." The woman hesitated. For a moment, Mia thought she was about to be shut down, sent back to her seat like a child playing dress-up. But then the attendant glanced down the aisle, toward the front, where 2 other crew members were huddled at the galley phone. She touched the earpiece in her left ear, whispered something, waited. Seconds passed. Then she looked back at Mia and gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod. "Stay here," she said. "Don't move." Mia nodded, but her body was already coiled, her mind running systems checks she couldn't even see. A minute later, the attendant returned, eyes sharper now, jaw tense. "They want you at the front," she said. That was all. No ceremony, no title, no warning. Just an open invitation into the place no one ever goes unless they wear a uniform or something's gone terribly wrong. Mia followed. She walked the aisle through a sea of worried faces, hushed voices, trembling hands gripping armrests. A child stared up at her as she passed, eyes wide and uncertain. She offered a small nod, as if to say, "It's going to be okay." But even she wasn't sure yet. At the front of the plane, the crew moved aside wordlessly. The cockpit door opened with a mechanical whine, and what Mia saw inside changed everything. The cockpit smelled like stress, burnt insulation, stale coffee, sweat. Red indicators blinked across the panels like 1,000 silent alarms, each screaming for attention. The air inside was hot, tighter than the cabin, and thick with the kind of tension that didn't need words to explain itself. Mia stepped inside, and the door hissed shut behind her. "Who are you?" the captain asked without turning his head. His hands gripped the yoke, knuckles white, breath uneven. His face glistened with sweat, headset half askew. The co-pilot sat slumped to the right, eyes closed, oxygen mask secured but unmoving. "Mia Weston," she said firmly. "Cadet pilot, Flight Academy. I was trained under Colonel Jameson's program. Over 400 hours in advanced commercial simulations. I know what a cascading systems failure looks like, and this is one." The captain finally turned to look at her. His eyes were bloodshot, exhausted, but searching. "You're a kid," he said flatly. "I'm the only one in this plane who knows what to do next," Mia replied, her voice sharper than she meant it to be. A beat of silence passed. Then another alarm screamed across the panel. "Left engine is overheating. Auto trim's gone haywire. Avionics are glitching. Nav system keeps freezing. We lost full comms 10 minutes ago."
Her mind was already decoding the warning tones, tracing back sequences from memory. Her body knew the switches even if her hands hadn't touched them in a real cockpit. "Altitude?" she asked, stepping closer. "Descending, unintentionally. We're under 28,000 and falling too fast." "May I?" She gestured to the co-pilot's seat. He hesitated, not because he didn't want to give it up, but because giving it up meant accepting that he couldn't land this bird alone. Finally, he nodded once, a brief, desperate surrender. "Strap in." She slid into the seat like it had always been hers. The switches, the layout, the vibrations of the yoke, everything was exactly as she had trained for. Except this time, it was real. She snapped on the headset, toggled the remaining functional audio channels, and brought up the emergency instrument overlay. Secondary trim failure confirmed. Manual control active. Hydraulic pressures weak but usable. Fuel feed on the right engine is inconsistent. If it chokes mid-descent, we stall. "Do you think we can stabilize it?" the captain asked. "We don't have a choice," Mia replied. Her hands moved fast now, each motion deliberate. She rebalanced the aircraft pitch with manual input, fingers dancing over the control surfaces. The plane wobbled under her touch, shuddering as it resisted the shift. Then finally, reluctantly, it began to steady. One problem at a time. "I'm routing backup avionics through the secondary bus," she said, breath focused. "Might give us a partial nav screen again." The flickering display stuttered, then held. Half the screen lit up in green. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The captain exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for the past 10 minutes. "You sure you're only 19? No one's ever sure what I am, but I know what this plane needs right now." The aircraft groaned under strain. Outside, clouds rushed by in smears of gray and silver. The descent rate was still too steep, but manageable now. "We're not making it to San Diego." "No," Mia confirmed, "but we can glide. Nearest safe airport's out of range. Then we land where we can." He looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You want to ditch this plane in open terrain?" "Not ditch. Land." "Where?" She pointed to a small ridge on the old terrain overlay. Ramona Ridge, old military strip, abandoned but intact. I read about it last month in a disaster prep brief. "You think it's still viable?" "I think it's our only shot." The captain didn't argue. He nodded, gritted his teeth, and gave her the con. "Your aircraft.
Mia's hands tightened on the yoke. My aircraft. It wasn't a simulation anymore. She wasn't running pre-programmed sequences. This was real. This was sky, wind, physics, and trust.
She adjusted the throttle carefully, coaxing the damaged engine to hold a little longer. Any sudden drop would kill the glide and send them into a spiral. The instruments blinked their warnings, but Mia didn't need their permission. She could feel the plane now. Not just fly it, feel it. Every breath, every vibration, every shift in the weight of the sky. Below them, the forest began to rise into view. Sharp ridgelines, treetops like claws, a jagged concrete strip barely wider than a runway still etched into the earth like a forgotten scar. "This is going to be tight," the captain said. "No margin," Mia agreed, "but we're going to make it." He looked at her once more, really looked this time, and nodded. In that moment, the cockpit was no longer an emergency, it was a battlefield, and she had just stepped into command. The sky was thinning fast, altitude 14,000 feet and dropping. The navigation overlay was gone again, one last electrical flicker before total silence from the digital systems. The emergency battery had drained under too much load. The remaining engine sputtered with an uneven growl, the last breaths of a dying machine fighting gravity with everything it had. Mia tightened her grip on the yoke. Her eyes swept the cockpit. Every digital aid was gone. No speed indicator, no altitude tape, no horizon line. The cockpit was quiet now, just the shrill wind outside, the faint rattle of dying hydraulics, and the raw, unfiltered breath of survival. The co-pilot hadn't stirred. The captain sat beside her, lips pressed into a bloodless line. He didn't speak anymore. He knew she was flying this. He knew she was their last chance. "Final engine drop in 30 seconds, he said quietly, reading off the last analog dial still lit. "I know," Mia whispered. Ahead, Ramona Ridge stretched into view, if you knew where to look. It wasn't a proper runway anymore, just a long scar of concrete, surrounded by dense pine and rising terrain. On satellite images, it looked like an overgrown access road. On a bad day, it looked like a death trap. But to Mia, it looked like the only option left. "We're too fast," the captain warned. "No flaps, no brakes, no reversers," Mia said. "We bleed speed with pitch." She adjusted the angle of descent, forcing the nose just enough to create drag without stalling. The controls fought her. Every inch of correction took twice the strength. Her forearms burned. The yoke vibrated like a live wire. But the plane responded. She could feel the weight shifting, feel the wind pushing back. This wasn't a simulator anymore. There were no resets, no pause buttons, no instructors watching from a safe booth. This was flight, raw, unforgiving, and hers to command. Behind the cockpit door, the cabin had gone utterly still. The passengers knew something was wrong, even if they didn't know what. The aircraft was flying lower than it should be, slower than it should. The wing lights flickered in the dusky sky. A distant mountain ridge loomed to the north, jagged and final. Mia toggled the landing gear lever manually. No sound. "Nothing," she muttered. "Emergency release," the captain asked. "Trying it now." She reached below the console, fingers scrambling over the release latch hidden beneath the panel. Then, clunk. A single, heavy mechanical noise from beneath the aircraft. "One gear, maybe two," she guessed. "Better than zero," the captain said. The wind screamed louder now. The engine coughed twice, then went quiet. Complete power loss. No thrust, no electronics. Just glide. Mia didn't blink. She adjusted trim, balanced yaw with her feet on the rudder pedals, and angled the aircraft along the approach vector she had memorized
30 seconds earlier. It had to be precise. No room for overshoot, no time to circle. The forest lined both sides of the cracked pavement. The margin for error was smaller than any certified pilot would ever accept. She had no choice. "This is going to be rough," the captain said. "It's going to be real," Mia corrected. The last trees fell away. The airstrip appeared, concrete glowing faintly in the dusk, half covered with moss and fractures, but still solid, still possible. Mia exhaled, last breath before impact. "Brace," she said into the mic, not knowing if the cabin would hear her. "Hold position. Stay calm. We're landing." The aircraft approached fast, too fast. There was no flare assist, no automatic spoilers, just her hands, her instincts, her will. She pulled the nose up slowly, delicately, guiding the angle of descent into the narrow envelope of survivability. The belly of the plane scraped air that felt too thin, too wild. The wings wobbled. The wind shifted. She compensated with micro-corrections, the way her instructor had taught her in that final week she wasn't supposed to pass. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on." Then, contact. The rear wheel slammed into the concrete with a scream of tortured rubber and sparks. The plane bounced, hard, up, then down again. The nose hit next, jolting both pilots forward into their harnesses. Metal howled, tires exploded, the undercarriage snapped and shuddered. But the plane stayed on the ground, skidding, sliding, tilting. Smoke filled the cockpit. The right gear buckled, but held long enough. Mia slammed the manual brake lever, muscle fighting against weight and momentum. The trees rushed toward them again. The edge of the forest was 30 yards out, then 20, then 10, and then stillness. The plane stopped. The engine was dead. The lights were out. But the aircraft was intact. They had landed. Mia's hands wouldn't let go of the yoke. Her pulse thundered in her ears.
Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths, but her mind was clear, sharp. She looked to the captain. He stared ahead, unmoving. Then he slowly turned to her, face pale, eyes wide with something that lived somewhere between disbelief and awe. "You just landed a dead-stick descent from 28,000 feet onto a strip no one's used in 15 years, he said, voice hoarse. Mia didn't speak. She just sat there, and for the first time, she let herself feel it. She had done it. At 19, with no power, no crew, no second chance. Just a belief that when the sky called, she would answer. The sun had disappeared behind the tree line by the time the emergency crews reached the aircraft. Headlights cut through the smoke and dusk like searchlights on a forgotten battlefield. Flashing red and white strobes danced across the belly of the jet, which now sat motionless on the cracked surface of Ramona Ridge like some giant creature stunned but still breathing. The forward cabin door hissed open. A sharp blast of cool evening air rushed in, and Mia Weston stood up. The harness peeled away from her shoulders like a second skin. Her muscles ached, her legs trembled slightly, but her grip on reality was solid, hyper-focused, grounded. As she stepped into the cabin, the silence broke. Gasps, cries, disbelief. People stood despite instructions not to. Strangers stared at her as if she were something out of a storybook, too young, too quiet, too impossible. A mother reached out to touch her sleeve, whispering thank you through tears. A boy clutched a stuffed animal, eyes locked on her like she was invincible. An elderly man tried to rise from his seat just to offer her a shaky salute. But Mia didn't speak. She simply nodded once, steady and quiet, and continued walking down the aisle.
past the faces she had just kept alive, past the shock, the gratitude, the awe. Outside, emergency responders formed a corridor along the ground. Some looked confused. The manifest had no crew changes, no record of who had flown the aircraft. But the fire chief didn't ask. He just met her eyes and stepped aside, as if instinctively understanding this wasn't the time for questions. Paramedics rushed past her toward the co-pilot. Flight attendants followed evacuation protocols. Slides deployed. Passengers funneled out into the open, blinking under floodlights, wrapped in emergency blankets, barefoot on cracked concrete. Mia stood away from them all, near the tail of the aircraft, alone. A female medic approached her gently, scanning for injuries. "Are you hurt?" Mia shook her head, just tired. The medic reached for her wrist to take a pulse, but paused when she saw Mia's hands. The skin across her knuckles was red, trembling slightly. Not burned, not broken, just clenched so long, so hard they had forgotten how to release.
"You want to sit down?" the medic offered. "I'd rather stay standing." A moment passed, then across the field, headlights shifted. A van pulled up. Reporters stepped out. Cameras, microphones, blinding lights already searching for the hero, the miracle, the mystery pilot who had saved a full flight with nothing but silence and instinct. One man approached with a camera already rolling. "Miss, are you the co-pilot? Were you part of the crew?" She didn't answer. More vehicles arrived. News anchors scrambled to get closer. Someone had leaked a photo, a blurry image taken from a passenger's phone of a teenage girl stepping out of the cockpit just after landing. No uniform, no insignia, just raw purpose in her eyes. And now the world wanted answers. The captain found her beside the wing. He had changed shirts, wiped the blood from his forehead, but his voice was still raw. "They're asking for your name," he said quietly. "They want a press conference. They want to know who landed the plane." Mia looked up at him. "I didn't do it for them," she said. "I know. That's why they need to hear from you." She hesitated. It wasn't that she was afraid, she was simply finished. "I don't want to be a story," she said. "Too late." He smiled softly. "You're already the headline." That night, she didn't speak to the cameras. She didn't take interviews. She didn't give statements. Instead, she sat alone on the rear step of a fire truck, a blanket around her shoulders, her face lit only by the red flash of rotating beacons and the distant headlights of rescue vehicles. Her parents had been taken away for medical evaluation. Her brother was crying, not from fear anymore, but pride. He kept saying her name like he didn't quite believe it. The internet exploded by midnight. Her name trended worldwide by sunrise. Teen cadet lands jet after dual pilot failure. Mia Weston, the 19-year-old who saved 186 lives. Not a licensed pilot, but the coolest head in the sky. By morning, every major network wanted her. But Mia still hadn't said a word. The airline offered her full tuition through flight school. The FAA sent flowers in a formal invitation. Aviation legends tweeted their admiration. A famous retired astronaut called her the spirit of flight incarnate. Still, she stayed quiet. 2 days later, a letter arrived at her hospital room door. Handwritten, from a girl in Wisconsin. "I saw your name online. My brother says girls can't fly planes, but I saw you do it. I'm going to start reading manuals like you. Maybe one day I'll land something too." Mia smiled for the first time since the landing. She picked up a pen and began writing back. Not for applause, not for fame, but for every girl who was told she couldn't. And for every moment the sky whispers, "Now it's your turn."